Now, good morning everyone. Thank you for coming to today's preliminary hearing. The purpose of the hearing is to explain how the Scottish COVID-19 inquiry will conduct its public impact hearings for two of its four main portfolios. These are Portfolio 4, which covers education and certification, and Portfolio 2, which covers business and welfare. These two impact hearings will run consecutively and are scheduled to begin the week of 4th November and to finish by 20th December. We will begin these hearings by looking at the public impacts on education and certification and then move on to business and welfare. I'm grateful to all the inquiry teams for helping to prepare for today and for our hearings in 6 weeks' time. We will shortly hear from the inquiry's co-lead counsel, Laura Ann van der Westhuysen KC, who will explain in more detail how she intends to present the evidence gathered so far in respect of these two portfolios. I'm also grateful to all the individuals and organisations who have helped the inquiry's investigations. I realise that for some this has involved recalling and sharing painful experiences, so I would like to thank those individuals for their courage and honesty. Before we turn to Ms van der Westhuysen's presentation, I would like to explain how the inquiry goes about gathering evidence and information. Hearing oral testimony from witnesses during a public hearing is one method, but there are many others. The inquiry continues to gather information from witness statements from those individuals and organisations who are formally asked to respond to the inquiry under our Rule 8 and Section 21 notices, from academic and expert research, from roundtable discussions with third sector organisations, and from those contributors who have responded to or engaged with the inquiry's public participation project, Let's Be Heard. The oral testimonies we will hear in the autumn are therefore only a small part of all the information gathered by this inquiry. It is simply not possible in the time we have available to hear from everyone who may wish to give an oral statement at a public hearing, but I would like to reassure you that all sources of information, including written statements, continue to be read and analysed. On 26th August, I made a direction that I will not invite opening statements from co-participants with leave to appear for these impact hearings. This direction is available on the inquiry website. Ms van der Westhuysen KC intends to make opening statements at the start of the respective impact hearings in November. I will issue a separate direction in respect of closing submissions. Core participants have been given the opportunity to submit questions in advance. Any representative of core participants in the hearing suite today who wishes to ask a question will be asked to come to the stand for recording purposes once we have finished hearing from Ms van der Westhuysen KC. These questions must be restricted to matters that relate to the impact hearings on education and certification and business and welfare. If more detailed responses are needed, I will provide written response to core participants by the 23rd of September. I would also like to remind individuals that public inquiries do not decide civil or criminal liability. They do not award compensation. The responsibility for that lies with courts and tribunals. Instead, inquiries investigate the matters entrusted to them by government. This inquiry has been asked to establish the facts and lessons learned from the devolved strategic response to the pandemic in Scotland. Finally, please note that all the inquiry's hearings, including today's session, are live streamed on our YouTube channel, where you can also find recordings of our previous hearings. You can also find further details of the inquiry's work on our website. I'd now like to ask Ms van der Westhuysen KC to explain how she intends to present the evidence gathered so far for our autumn hearings. Thank you all. Ms van der Westhuysen.
Be turned off and I'm going to be... there we go.
Do I press the red button to turn me off?
I'm not sure, my lord, but I think,
well, let's try. Hold your breath, folks.
First time out.
It didn't blow up.
Thank you, my lord. I appear today with my learned friends David Turner, advocate, Mary Ellen Stewart, advocate, and Chris Stephen, advocate, who will be assisting me in preparing and presenting evidence at the upcoming impact hearings. We're also joined this morning by a number of legal representatives for core participants who've been granted leave to appear at either or both sets of hearings. I don't propose to introduce them all individually today, but will endeavour to do so at the start of the substantive hearings. What I will do, however, my Lord, is list the core participants who have been granted leave to appear at the hearings at the relevant points in my presentation. As your Lordship has noted, the purpose of today's hearing is to explain how the inquiry will conduct its public hearings for two of its four main investigative portfolios, and also to explain more generally how the relevant impact evidence will be presented. The impact hearings relevant to Portfolio 4, which covers inquiry's terms of reference K relating to the delivery of education and certification, are due to start in the week commencing 4 November 2024. And those relevant to Portfolio 2, which covers the inquiry's term of reference 2L and J relating to business and welfare support, are due to start in the week commencing 2 December 2024. Although there will be two separate sets of hearings, impact hearings, it was decided to hold one preliminary hearing today, given that a broadly similar approach is being taken in relation to both. In setting out how I propose to present the relevant impact evidence, I will first set out, for context, some brief general observations relating to the background to the inquiry and its approach to impact evidence. Secondly, to address matters relevant to the investigation and presentation of impact evidence relating to the delivery of education and certification and the first set of impact hearings. Thirdly, to address matters relevant to the investigation and presentation of impact evidence relating to business and welfare support and the second set of impact hearings. And finally, to address a few matters of procedural matters of general relevance. If I might turn first, my Lord, to the inquiry's background and general approach, I propose to refer briefly to relevant parts of the inquiry's terms of reference, the inquiry's general approach to impact hearings, and the role of the inquiry's public participation project, Let's Be Heard. This, as I said, my Lord, is to provide context for understanding the approach being taken to the presentation of evidence in relation to the upcoming impact hearings. In relation to the inquiry's terms of reference, the aim of the inquiry is set out in paragraph 1 of the terms of reference and is to establish the facts of and to learn lessons from the strategic response of the COVID-19 pandemic in Scotland. Its scope is set out in paragraph 2, which is to investigate the strategic elements of the handling of the pandemic relating to 12 areas, 3 of which are relevant to the upcoming impact hearings. The inquiry can only report on devolved matters. With the exception of pandemic planning, the inquiry's investigations are required to cover the period between 1 January 2020 and 31 December 2022. It must, however, be recognised that some of the impacts of decisions to lock down and apply other restrictions continue to reverberate and to be felt to this day. Paragraph 5 of the inquiry's terms of reference require the inquiry to demonstrate how human rights-based approaches contributed to its findings and recommendations. And paragraph 7 requires your Lordship, where your Lordship deems it appropriate and necessary, to consider the impacts of the strategic elements of the handling of the pandemic on the exercise of convention rights and any disparities in the strategic elements of the handling of the pandemic, including unequal impacts on people. As regards the approach to impact hearings, the inquiry has adopted a thematic approach to its impact hearings and is considering evidence about the impacts of the strategic response in Scotland under a number of themes. The inquiry has already held impact hearings relating to health and social care, during which it heard evidence from many individuals as well as organisations. The approach of starting the investigations and public hearings by focusing on the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic and the strategic response is consistent with your Lordship's commitment to the inquiry taking a person-centred, human rights-based approach. This also allows a better understanding of the nature and extent of those impacts and where and by whom they were most deeply felt, which in turn enables the inquiry to direct its ongoing investigations in relation to implementation and decision-making in a more focused way. With regards to impacts relating to the delivery of education and certification and to business and welfare support, the Portfolio 4 and 2 teams have engaged predominantly, although not exclusively, with organisations. This approach will be reflected at the upcoming hearings, and which we'll be hearing evidence from organisations rather than from individuals. One of the main reasons for adopting this approach, my Lord, is because the relevant impacts that we'll be hearing about are ones that were felt particularly widely across society and affected whole sectors and communities rather than particular groups. Organisations are likely to have a greater breadth of information about and insight into the extent of those impacts than individuals would. Organisations are also able to reflect the collective views of their members and the experiences of those they serve, and to provide a more comprehensive overview of the relevant impacts and issues. That's not to say, my Lord, that the inquiry is not interested in hearing about personal experiences of those impacts. On the contrary, the inquiry's public participation project, Let's Be Heard, was set up specifically to give everyone affected by the strategic response to the COVID-19 pandemic in Scotland the chance to share their experiences directly with the inquiry. The Let's Be Heard team is part of the inquiry's team, and its team members work closely with colleagues in the legal team in relation to engagement with organisations and individuals. Let's Be Heard has the capacity to gather and collate accounts of personal experiences on a scale that the inquiry would simply not be able to accommodate through traditional means such as witness statements, requests for evidence under Rule 8 of the inquiry's Scotland rules, or at hearings. By way of illustration, my Lord, during its national engagement period, which ran for 7 months between May and December 2023, Let's Be Heard gathered experiences for more than 5,400 people from every local authority in Scotland who were able to share their views with the inquiry in a variety of ways. Let's Be Heard has also published a preliminary report on the early findings, and that was done in November 2023. During 2024, Let's Be Heard is continuing to analyse people's experiences. It's also adopting a more targeted approach through its focused engagement period, during which it is working with organisations to hear from specific groups about particular themes. And this is being done through a range of activities such as surveys, focus groups and workshops. It will be publishing a series of reports based on key findings, which will support the inquiry's ongoing investigations and will inform its reports and recommendations. It is important, my Lord, to emphasise that Let's Be Heard continues to be the primary route through which individuals can engage directly with the inquiry about their personal experiences. My Lord, I'll now turn to address matters relevant to the investigation and presentation of impact evidence relating to the delivery of education and certification and the first set of upcoming impact hearings. These matters will include the scope of Portfolio 4, core participants with leave to appear at the impact hearings, engagement undertaken by the Portfolio 4 team and the evidence gathered so far, the approach to be taken to the presentation of evidence at the impact hearings, engagement undertaken by Let's Be Heard, relevant specifically to the delivery of education and certification, and the proposed review of evidence not referred to at the impact hearings. In terms of its scope, the inquiry's investigative Portfolio 4 covers term of reference 2K, which requires the inquiry to investigate the strategic handling of the pandemic relating specifically to the delivery of education and certification. The inquiry has commissioned a number of academic reports which provide reviews and literature and research relevant to impacts in relation to the delivery of education and certification, and those are available on the inquiry's website. These reports have informed the scope of what's being investigated in relation to the delivery of education and certification. There are consequently 6 investigative streams within Portfolio 4, covering early learning and childcare, secondly, primary and secondary education, third, additional support for learning, 4, further and higher education, 5, apprenticeships, and 6, youth work. Although the majority of learners within these sectors are children and young people, Adult learners are also included within the scope of what's being investigated. In terms of core participants, a total of 19 organisations are currently designated as core participants in relation to the term of reference 2K, of which 14 have been granted leave to appear at the relevant impact hearings. These are City of Edinburgh Council, College of Paramedics, Convention of Scottish Local Authorities, or COSLA, Long COVID Kids, PAMIS, Public Health Scotland, Royal College of Nursing, Scottish COVID Bereaved, Scottish Hazards, Scottish Qualifications Authority, Scottish Trades Union Congress, or STUC, the Care Inspectorate, Scottish Women's Rights Organisation, and the Scottish Ministers. In relation to engagement and evidence, Your Lordship has already underlined how the inquiry goes about gathering its evidence and has pointed out that the oral testimonies from witnesses during public hearings is only one way in which the inquiry can gather evidence. In this regard, in addition to obtaining witness statements, making Rule 8 requests and commissioning academic research, the Portfolio 4 team has held a number of roundtable meetings with organisations and individuals. Those roundtable meetings proved to be very useful sources of information. Reports of those meetings, summarising the key impacts and issues discussed, have therefore been prepared for approval by participants and use by the inquiry, some of which will be referred to at the hearings. In terms of impact evidence relating to the delivery of education and certification, the inquiry's Portfolio 4 team has received 73 responses to Rule 8 requests, has taken 165 statements, and has held 26 roundtable discussions with various organisations and individuals, including several with children and young people. I would pause, my Lord, to point out that the majority of organisations and individuals with whom the Portfolio team has engaged are not core participants, but have nevertheless generally provided their time to assist the inquiry with its investigations. In terms of the hearings themselves, I will be assisted by Ms. Stewart and Mr. Stephen. Between us, we will be leading a variety of witnesses who have been selected very carefully with a view to ensuring that evidence is heard on a range of impacts across all sectors of education covered by the 6 investigative streams. A combination of panel sessions of between 2 and 4 and single witness sessions will be held. Witnesses will be led on the basis of witness statements, Rule 8 responses, and/or roundtable reports. We do not intend to ask each witness to speak to everything in their witness statement or Rule 8 response, but rather to focus on issues of particular relevance for each witness with a view to, if possible, avoiding repetition, or certainly unnecessary repetition. The hearings will aim to highlight key issues and impacts experienced by children and young people, parents and carers, adult learners, workers and organisations involved in the delivery of education and certification as a consequence of decisions to lock down and impose other restrictions across all sectors covered by the 6 investigative streams that I've mentioned earlier. And as I've already mentioned, during the hearings, evidence will be led from organisations, not from individuals, who are the focus of Let's Be Heard. In this regard, my Lord, I'll outline some of the work that Let's Be Heard has been engaging in that's relevant to these upcoming hearings, or certainly the impacts being considered at those hearings. So in addition to all the evidence I mentioned already that's been obtained by the Inquiry Portfolio 4 team, experiences relating to the delivery of education and certification have been shared with the inquiry through Let's Be Heard. Let's Be Heard has been engaging actively with children and young people since May 2023. During its national engagement period, it launched a bespoke children and young people's response form and received 382 responses to that. Over the course of its engagement, it has gathered, or at least has confirmed sessions to gather, experiences from those attending mainstream primary and secondary school, youth attending dedicated additional support needs schools, young and underpaid carers, young people in residential care and their carers, those who attended hub settings, Black and minority ethnic youth, those in island communities, young mothers, civically engaged youths, for example, those engaging through Scottish Youth Parliament, young people impacted or at risk of homelessness, and young people living or attending schools in areas affected by multiple deprivation indicators. It has been important for the inquiry through Let's Be Heard to engage with a range of young people facing different sets of circumstances in order to understand better the unequal impacts that were felt across different societal groups within this young cohort. As part of its focused engagement period, Let's Be Heard launched 3 surveys on 2 September 2024 that are directly relevant to the delivery of education and certification. These were prepared with input from the Portfolio 4 legal team. The first, my lord, is the Children and Young People Survey for 8 years and above. This is designed to better understand what the pandemic was like for younger people in Scotland between January 2020 and December 2022. It includes 10 questions, including questions relating specifically to education. The other 2 surveys that have been launched are designed to hear more from education and learning and early learning professionals involved in delivering and supporting education and childcare services in Scotland, again between January 2020 and 31 December 2022. Each of those surveys takes 15 to 20 minutes to complete. These are, firstly, the Early Learning and Childcare Survey, which is aimed at early learning practitioners, managers, support staff and childminders. And the second one is the School Survey, Teacher, School Management and Educational Support Staff, which is aimed at teachers and school staff who are directly involved in children and young people's learning. These 3 surveys are currently due to close on Friday, the 29th of November 2024, so I would encourage any early learning and school education staff who would like to share their experiences directly with the inquiry, and as many children and young people as possible to take part in those surveys. My lord, to date, Let's Be Heard has heard directly from more than 840 children and young people in Scotland aged from 5 years to 24 years, the majority of whom have been aged between 11 to 24 years. Their experience has been gathered through a combination of methods, including response forms received during the national and focused engagement phases of Let's Be Heard, in-person information sharing at stands at colleges and university campuses and contact with 14 student unions, collaborations with the Scottish Youth Parliament, which has allowed direct experience gathering through in-person workshops, further workshops and experience gathering sessions with children and young people. In addition, Let's Be Heard has held workshops and experience gathering sessions with more than 60 parents, carers and teachers to date, and it intends to hear more of the course of its focused engagement and period. My lord, the inquiry would not reasonably be able to gather information of this scale through witness statements, Rule 8 responses and hearings, as I've already indicated. In terms of the evidence, my lord, the hearings, as I've already indicated, will provide an overview of the relevant impacts, or the majority of the impact evidence held by the inquiry, however, cannot be led at those hearings. This evidence includes witness statements, Rule 8 response, and roundtable reports of roundtable meetings. That evidence, as your lordship already indicated, is being reviewed by members of the inquiry team who have already started to prepare summaries of that evidence. Those summaries, it's intended, will form the basis of a narrative record of impact evidence relating to the delivery of education and certification, and will also include evidence that's heard at the hearings. Those narrative records, as presently advised, will be published in 2025. Core participants with leave to appear at the hearings will receive extracts of the narrative record before it's published and may be asked to provide comments. My lord, I'll now turn to address matters relevant to the investigation and presentation of impact evidence relating to business and welfare assistance and the second set of impact hearings. Again, these matters include what I've already touched on in relation to Portfolio 4, namely, First, the scope of Portfolio 2, core participants with leave to appear at the relevant impact hearings, engagement undertaken by the Portfolio 2 team and evidence gathered to date, the approach to be taken to the presentation of evidence at the impact hearings, the engagement undertaken by Let's Be Heard relevant to business and welfare support, and a review of the evidence not referred to at the impact hearings. A lot of what I've already said about the approach being taken in relation to education and certification, impact hearings is equally applicable to the business and welfare impact hearings, so I'll try not to repeat too much of that. In terms of scope, the inquiry's investigative Portfolio 2 covers paragraphs 2J and 2L of the inquiry's terms of reference, which require the inquiry to investigate the devolved strategic elements of the handling of the pandemic in relation to, in the case of J, welfare assistance programs, for example, those relating to benefits or the provision of food provided or supported by public agencies, and, in the case of L, financial support and guidance given to businesses and the self-employed, including in relation to the identification of key workers and public agencies. In terms of core participants, 15 organisations and groups have core participation with core participant status in relation to terms of reference 2J and L have been granted leave to appear at the relevant impact hearings. These are Central Scotland Care Homes, City of Edinburgh Council, COSLA, Homelessness Network Scotland, Long COVID Kids, PARMIS, who I should have said earlier, my lord, I understand, is promoting a more inclusive society, is the acronym, Refugees for Justice, Scottish Care, Scottish COVID Bereaved, Scottish Enterprise, Scottish Hazards, Scottish Healthcare Workers Coalition, STUC, Scottish Women's Rights Organisation, and the Scottish Ministers. 9 of these core participants have also been granted leave to appear at the impact hearings relevant to the delivery of education and certification, so there is a degree of overlap, 6 have not. In terms of engagement and evidence, the Portfolio 2 team has similarly obtained witness statements, made Rule 8 requests, commissioned academic research, and held roundtable meetings, which have largely been with third sector organisations. In relation to impact evidence, the Portfolio 2 team has received approximately 59 responses to Rule 8 requests, has taken around 53 statements, and has held 27 roundtable discussions with various organisations and businesses. Again, the majority of those with whom the Portfolio team is engaged are not core participants. In terms of the hearings themselves, in this case I'll be assisted by Mr. Turner and Mr. Stephen. Between us, we'll be leading a variety of witnesses who, as with the Portfolio 4 witnesses, have been selected carefully in order to try to ensure that evidence is heard on a range of impacts. A combination of panel sessions and single witness sessions will also be used at these hearings, with witnesses being led on the basis of witness statements, Rule 8 responses, and or roundtable reports. As with education and certification impact hearings, we will not ask witnesses to speak to everything in their statements or Rule 8 responses, but we'll try to focus on issues of particular relevance for each witness. The hearings will highlight key issues and impacts experienced by individuals and organisations relating to business and welfare support, including impacts on businesses and the self-employed, impacts on individuals in the context of welfare assistance programs, and impacts on organisations that delivered welfare assistance during the pandemic. As with the education and certification impact hearings, we will be hearing evidence from organisations rather than from individuals. Again, my lord, in addition to the evidence obtained by the Portfolio 2 team, experiences relating to business and welfare support were shared with the inquiry through Let's Be Heard during its national engagement period. This was done through various methods, including reports from people across Scotland, including people from Scotland completing the general online and paper forms outlining their general experiences. Those forms covered all aspects of the inquiry's terms of reference and asked people to speak about what was most important to them, so it wasn't exclusive to business and welfare. Let's Be Heard has attended 12 group discussions, hearing from more than 100 people on general themes where aspects of business and or welfare were discussed. The inquiry also recognises that many people may have already shared their experiences through other organisations, so existing data and information has been gathered by Let's Be Heard through 31 reports from external stakeholders describing those experiences in relation specifically to welfare. As part of its focused engagement period, Let's Be Heard is employing various methods to hear further experiences relating to business and welfare, support. Firstly, in relation to business support, on the 6th of June 2024, Let's Be Heard launched a survey for businesses in order to understand the impacts of the pandemic on individual businesses and their owners. The survey was developed again in conjunction with the Portfolio 2 legal team. There have been 240 responses to that survey so far. It takes approximately 10 minutes to complete, and that is due to close on the 30th of September 2024. So I would encourage any business owners who still wish to share their experiences directly with the inquiry to take time to complete that survey before it closes. That survey work, my Lord, has also been complemented by a number of group discussions for business owners run by the Let's Be Heard team. In relation to welfare support, the Let's Be Heard is arranging group discussions with specific audiences to understand more about access to benefits, food, fuel poverty, housing, homelessness and business. 24 group discussions arranged through 20 organisations have already been confirmed or are in discussion. Turning then, my Lord, to the review of evidence. As with the evidence relating to impacts relating to the delivery of education and certification, the majority of the impact evidence held by the inquiry relating to business and welfare assistance, which includes witness statements, Rule 8 responses and reports of roundtable meetings, cannot be led at the impact hearings. There simply isn't time. That evidence, however, is being reviewed by the members of the inquiry team who have started again to prepare summaries of that evidence. It is intended that those summaries will form the basis of narrative records of impact evidence relating to business assistance and separately welfare assistance, and will also include evidence heard at the hearings. The narrative records, again, are intended to be published in 2025, as presently advised. Core participants with leave to appear at the relevant hearings will receive extracts of the relevant narrative records before they are published and may be invited to provide comments. Before concluding, my Lord, I'll address briefly 4 general matters relating to procedure. These relate firstly to disclosure, secondly timetabling, thirdly Rule 9 procedure, and fourthly restrictions on the disclosure of information. In terms of disclosure, the inquiry intends to disclose witness statements and other documents to be referred to at the hearings to core participants with leave to appear 1 month in advance of a witness's evidence. That disclosure will begin on the 7th of October 2024. In terms of timetabling, the inquiry will provide a witness list along with documents that are disclosed to core participants. Hearings will generally start at 10 a.m. and finish by 4 p.m., but we might occasionally need to start a little later or start a little earlier and finish later. The inquiry will be sitting between 4 and 5 days a week in order to accommodate witness availability and also to ensure that we get through the relevant evidence in the time available. I don't have an indication of when they'll be published, but in due course and certainly ahead of the hearings, witness timetables will be published on the inquiry's website. In terms of the Rule 9 procedure and the questioning of witnesses, Your Lordship has issued guidance that is available on the inquiry website that sets out the procedure for this. It requires informal approaches to counsel to be made through the inquiry mailbox no later than 1 week before a witness is due to give evidence, with suggestions of relevant questions or topics. It also provides a more formal procedure for applications to be made to Your Lordship no later than 2 working days before the relevant witness is due to give evidence, in the event that counsel is not minded to ask the questions suggested. Finally, it provides that your Lordship will consider applications to question a witness at the conclusion of their evidence, but that will be restricted to information that has arisen during the course of their evidence that is material, relevant and new. My Lord, given that we are dealing specifically with impact evidence, I don't anticipate or hope that there won't be too many additional questions to be put, and I would just encourage legal representatives to bear in mind the approach that we're taking, which is to keep the hearings focused and to focus on specific aspects of the witness's testimony or the evidence, and not cover all aspects that are covered in their Rule 8 responses and witness statements, which will nevertheless be taken into account by the inquiry. In relation to restrictions on the disclosure of information, your Lordship issued Restriction Order 1 covering the publication or disclosure of evidence and documents pertaining to the health and social care in the inquiry's investigation of matters covered by terms of reference 2G, H, I, C, D, E and F, as well as a number of individual restriction orders relating to relevant witnesses at those hearings. There are currently no restriction orders pertaining specifically to the inquiry's investigation of matters covered by the 3 terms of reference that are the subject of the upcoming hearings, or in relation to any of the witnesses that are intended to be called. However, my Lord, there is a general restriction order in place that covers witness statements, documents, and all other evidence, information and material that is either provided to or generated by the inquiry and shared with core participants and other recipients, which operates to restrict their disclosure or publication prior to publication thereof by the inquiry itself. So I'd simply remind again the core participants and their legal representatives of that general restriction order. A copy of that is available on the inquiry website. My Lord, those are my opening submissions, and unless I can assist your Lordship further, I will conclude there.
Thank you very much indeed, Ms van der Westhuizen. Right, now, a number of co-participants have submitted questions in advance of this preliminary hearing, and it's my intention to provide answers to those questions today. I've received 2 questions about disclosure of the list of witnesses and the witness timetable. Mr. Michael Clancy, on behalf of the Law Society of Scotland, asked the following questions. Which witnesses will be giving evidence, as that will determine what, if any, questions we would like to put forward? And can you please send a list of prospective witnesses? A similar question was received from Rowan Brown on behalf of the College of Paramedics. That question was, is the inquiry able to indicate when core participants will receive a schedule or timetable for the hearings due to start in November? Now, the answers to those questions are in respect of both portfolios 4 and 2. We cannot provide a witness list, as we have witnesses who are yet to confirm to us they will attend. A witness list will be provided alongside disclosure to those core participants with leave to appear, and we intend to issue disclosure 1 month in advance of a witness evidence for the respective portfolios. I've received 2 questions about disclosure of witness statements in respect of the Portfolio 4 hearing. Nicola McLaren from the Central Legal Office on behalf of NHS Scotland asked, when will we be provided with the witness statements for the upcoming Portfolio 4 hearings? A similar question was received from Kefa Hunter of Brody's on behalf of the Scottish Qualifications Authority and Scottish Care. The question was, we note the Supplementary Rule 9 guidance for the education and certification and the business and welfare impact hearings that was issued by the inquiry on 17th September 2024. We should be grateful if the inquiry would confirm when it expects material to be disclosed to core participants in advance of any impact hearing, given core participants are to approach counsel to the inquiry with any relevant questions or topics they wish to have put to a witness no later than 1 week in advance of that witness giving evidence. And the answer to that question is we intend to disclose witness statements 1 month in advance of a witness's evidence, with disclosure commencing on 7th October 2024. I've received a question about the provisional outline of evidence, beg your pardon, and closing statements from Sarah Mitchell of the Scottish Government Legal Division on behalf of the Scottish Government. That question being, when can we expect to receive the provisional outline of evidence documents for P2 and P4? And the answer to that question is that extracts of the narratives of evidence will be provided to core participants with leave to appear at a date after the conclusion of the impact hearings. Those core participants may be asked to comment. Detailed guidance in respect to the specific matters the inquiry wish comment on will be provided when the narratives are issued. The same author provided a further question. Will closing statements be permitted? And if so, will they be delivered on the final day of the impact hearings, or will a dedicated hearing be fixed at a later date? And the answer to that question is I will issue a direction on closing submissions in due course. Finally, I received a question from Anderson Strathern on behalf of the Royal College of Nursing. As this is a question about a specific witness, the inquiry legal team will respond to that question directly via individual email correspondence. Now, those are the questions that I've received to date. I'll ask at this stage if there are any further questions from participants in the gathering and the hearing today. If there are, I'll ask those person or that person to come forward, disclose their identity and give the question. I will, of course, attempt to answer it, but in all probability, I will answer that or have that answered by mail by the end of Monday next week. Are there any other questions from any participant in the hall today? Well, it would appear there are none. So, in the absence of any further question, that brings an end to this preliminary hearing. Can I thank you all for your attendance today? I hope it has proved helpful, and I look forward to seeing you all starting off on the, I think it was the, I forgot the date, is it the 4th of November of this year, in about 6 weeks' time. Thank you all very much. Very good. That ends proceedings.